Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samantha Adams. I'm a lecturer in industrial psychology. And what I'd like to speak to you today is the work that I've done using gamification on the Learning Management System, which is referred to as, or called SUNLearn, which is a Moodle platform. I'm really going to speak about the practical application of it as well as the student experiences. So my application of gamification is part of my PhD study. I'm not a doctor just yet. And it's really just an initial, it started out as an initial first attempt throwing a bunch of game elements into or onto the learning management system and waiting to see what happened. So I'm just going to speak through that. So gamification, as we know, is the use of game elements and game thinking in non-game environments. So this is the broad general definition of what it is. And according to the literature and the proponents of gamification, it's meant to motivate and engage learners in an educational context. From what I've read up to now, it's hit and miss in most cases. So, and the one thing, when I started out, I really wanted to come up with a checklist, something that people could tick and say, yes, I've done this, I've done that, and the outcome at the end would be a motivated and engaged learner. Unfortunately, it does not happen that way. You really need to think carefully about how you are using it, what you are using it for, and then actually how you roll it out. So I know the question is going to be, is this labor intensive? And I'll let you know from the get-go, yes, it is. Okay, but just to get you familiar with the concept of gamification, when I talk about game elements, I would like you to think of a Monopoly board. So Monopoly is a very popular game. You've probably played it with your kids, or you played it as a kid, or maybe with your family and friends. And really, when we look at Monopoly, what it does, some of the elements, is it creates a context. Okay, so your context is, you are a hotel mogul and you're moving around the board buying property. You have an avatar, so you could be maybe a pretty little dog or a boot or whatever else it is. It's also a game of chance. So you roll a dice, and you can either move so you can move forward a certain number of places, and depending on where you land, something could happen. We also have an element of mystery. So with that chance, you don't know where you're going to land. We also have rewards. Okay, so you can win money, you can win property. You also have competition. Okay, so you are working in a social context, but you are competing against other people. But there's also an element of cooperation or collaboration. So you can work with others in order to advance yourself in the game. So these are the game elements. Okay, and this is what I basically did was I looked at all the elements from different studies and different pieces of literature, and I tried to incorporate them into my own course. So with gamification, we have two types. So firstly, we have structural gamification. Structural gamification is where you apply gamification elements to propel students through the content. So you don't make any changes to the content, but you provide a structure. So say, for instance, shooting an answer. You're not changing the content, but you are providing a frame for how they engage with the content. Content gamification alters the content to make it more game-like by adding stories and characters. So say, for instance, if you have a group of medical students, you could actually create a hypothetical patient that they have to diagnose or treat in a certain way. And that could be one way in which the content is the game. So with my study, what I'm actually looking at is, or what I'm trying to achieve, is to design and test an educational gamification application that facilitates student engagement. So my main focus is on student engagement, the behavioral components, the cognitive as well as the emotional components of student engagement. And basically where my study starts is trying to understand what are the properties of an educational gamification application that results in student engagement. So I'm really trying to assess with the combination of properties that I am putting in, the elements that I am putting in, what needs to be there in order to have an engaged student at the end of the day. So I'm using a design-based research approach. So with design-based research, you basically go through iterative cycles of analysis, design, development, and implementation. So I took these different phases and I've implemented them in my course. I've come based on the literature, based on discussions with people who have used gamification, based on discussions with experts of the learning management system, what is possible. I've now put together, I guess you can call it a pilot version of a gamified application. So the sample I made use of, the course that I've applied this in is an industrial psychology service module. So the students are not industrial psychology students, but they are occupational therapy students. And it's a 6-credit module. They are introduced to the principles of industrial psychology, and for a lot of them, they don't actually see why they need to take an industrial psychology module. So I have a very strong emphasis on, or what I really try to do is get them to think about how is an occupational therapist going to make use of industrial psychology principles or HR processes, because that's also a strong focus of the course. So there are about 48 students in the class, majority female. Every year there's maybe not, one male, and then a spread across the languages. So the intervention is hosted on the SUNLearn platform. So SUNLearn is a Moodle platform. It's very limited in terms of what you can put on there, how students can interact. So you're really restricted by what the platform allows you to do. But there are wonderful new applications every day and plugins that they are creating. One that I think you guys should maybe check out is iSpring. Yeah. Okay, I've had a look at it. It looks like a lot of work, but it might help. And then what I did was I took game elements. So I took a little bit from structural gamification, a little bit from content gamification, and then I applied these game elements on the platform. So what I'm going to show you is just screenshots of how I applied each of these. So firstly, there was a storyline. So it's a game, but it's not a game in the conventional sense. So it's not. So there's a difference also between gamification and a serious game. So most people understand that a serious game is probably the Candy Crush you play on your phone, or the first-person shooter that your son plays. That is a serious game. This, however, has a game feel to it. They call it a lightweight application of gamification. So my lightweight application is based on a storyline called OT Tycoon. So the storyline is that the students they have completed their degree. They are now planning to open up their own practice, so they're projecting into the future. They're opening up their own practice, but what I want them to do is focus on industrial psychology principles to manage their people and their HR processes to get things going in their business on the people side of things. So we're not worried really about how much money you have and that sort of thing. But what I've done this year is the points that they collect, we are now referring to them as randellas, and they can accumulate randellas, so it's capital for their company, which can then be exchanged for other things at the end. So the storyline is that their goal is to become an OT tycoon. So to build this big practice that, their people are happy, their clients are happy. That's basically what they're trying to achieve. So in the game, we have levels. So once a student, we have resources firstly. So within the resources, I've placed the PowerPoint slides. I've placed all the information that they need, or information and instructions that they need in order to play the game, or to understand what is required from them in order to play the game. At each level, when we open it up, we have icons. So each instruction that is within the level is represented by a specific icon, but there's also a description next to the icon. So I've taken a more collaborative learning approach for my game. So they need to select group members. I've kept the groups quite small. It's 3 people per group. And within that group, they then take on the learning activities together. What I found is that even though they were working in groups, they were still slackers even in such a small group. So what I instituted at the end of the course was almost a buddy rating, where you could assign a percentage of the mark to your peers. So it was done anonymously, and you could say this person's going to get 100% of the mark because they've contributed to all the assignments, or this person will get 20%. And you would be surprised at how many people wanted to give their peers 10 and 20%. Okay. Points. So I used to refer to them as experience points. This year, because I'm running the intervention again, they are referred to as Randellas now. They would get points for knowledge checks. So a knowledge check is a short quiz on the content of a chapter. There would be individual quests. So maybe they had to complete a questionnaire and explain what their code is in terms of the career management section. Or a group quest. So this would be a much bigger learning activity that they would have to complete as a group. Class attendance also, as well as class activities, also received points. So with the knowledge check, so the knowledge check is a very short, simple quiz. It's also limited in terms of time, 10 questions in 10 minutes. So they have to go and familiarize themselves with the work. They can't only rely on the slides, because my slides are also very sparsely populated. So they actually need to go and look at the textbook and familiarize themselves, and then they would get 3 attempts. This year I've reduced the number of attempts as we move up the levels. So as you move up the levels, you get less and less opportunity to practice it again. But you can then trade your points in at the end of the term in order to see the question again, or to see the quiz again. I also pull through some of the quiz questions into their tests and exams, which they are very happy with. Okay. I then also included quest. So a quest would be, it's more of a challenge. So it's based on the content that we are looking at within a particular chapter, or over a few chapters. And the quest then requires them to put together a document or a presentation. So for example, we were looking at individual differences and motivational theories. So I said that they need to look at their ideal employee and come up with a profile, a personality profile, maybe also include elements of intelligence, of this individual, and then linking that with the motivation theories. How would you motivate that type of person? So, and also in the instruction, they need to explain to me why, or justify why they have made those choices. So it's really trying to get them to not only recall the information or rewrite the information, but they actually need to think a little bit further about how they synthesize it and practically apply it to the question I've asked. There are also bonus activities. So the one issue that did come up is that some of the activities were for marks, but some of them were for marks and points. And that confused them a little bit. So this year everything is just for points and for marks, so that there isn't really much confusion in that sense. We also have a progress bar, so as you progress through each level, you can see how you've progressed. Have you done all the activities that are required? In terms of the leaderboard, for some reason SUNLearn didn't really pull in all the marks effectively, but with what we decided with our leaderboard was only to show the top 5 people. So you need to become a bit creative in ensuring that there are people that are pushing ahead of the others in terms of your activities. I also included an element of competition. So with competition, there would be like an in-class competition they had to do, or one of the competitions I had was on the leadership theories that we look at. They had to take a leadership theory and then present it in a very creative way, and they were marked by me and the rest of the class. So whoever got the highest mark for that then won the competition, or their group won the competition. So what I did collect feedback from them, or I did get them to fill out a feedback form, but I'm not going to present that information here. What I actually do want to present is the focus group interview that I conducted with them. So I used interactive qualitative analysis, or a part of it, And basically what that does is, or the way that you conduct it is, you pose a research question, you get the participants to brainstorm and record all their thoughts and experiences. So basically I asked them what worked, what didn't work, what are the advantages of this, what are the disadvantages. And I gave them an opportunity to just write down everything that they could think of. So it's very similar to other forms of eliciting information from a group or brainstorming. They then had to discuss and analyze each idea that popped up, and then what they had to, and then clarify meaning, and then group the ideas, which is referred to as inductive coding. So ideas that were similar, they had to then group them, and then they had to name that code or name that group. So they do all the work, which is why it's referred to as a social constructivism. So it's their responsibility to convey their experience, which is one of the reasons why I chose this technique. So some of the themes that came up, so this is all the work that they've done. So the themes that popped up, or the things that they enjoyed or that didn't enjoy, were things like competition, communication, so the instructions and feedback, structure, group work, content, and concept. So I've included some excerpts from the explanations on these. So if we look at competition, for some students, it's really about the individual. Some students enjoyed the competition, where others did not enjoy the competition. Some of them saw it as being positive, others saw it as being negative. So you really need to be careful in terms of competition, how you strike a balance between that. I didn't feel that I emphasized competition within this. There were 1 or 2 activities that were competitive, but my focus was more on collaboration, so collaboration within their group. There was very little competition amongst groups, except for the one activity that I spoke to you about. In terms of communication and instruction, so there was confusion between the points and the marks. There was, my feedback, because I was running this on my own and also running another course at the same time, I couldn't give them feedback as readily as they needed it or wanted it. So the activities were unfortunately not graded on the system. So yes, they got immediate feedback for their knowledge checks or their little quizzes that they did. But with their larger learning activities, it would take me about 2 weeks to mark everybody's and upload the marks and then give them feedback too. So that was a complaint on their side. Also, just in terms of the instructions, they felt that some of the instructions were a bit vague, which I've worked on this year to improve. The structure, so in terms of the structure, they commented on the fact that there were levels. They commented on the fact that there were knowledge checks. They commented on how the levels made them think and feel. So moving from one level to another makes me feel like I am making progress. And I don't quite know how to interpret it, but in terms of the fact that some activities were only for points and some were for marks and points, a lot of the times they would actually just leave the activities that were for points. Towards the end of the semester, it doesn't matter. If it's not for marks, I'm not doing it. So in terms of the structure of the course or the structure, those were the elements that popped out for them. Group work. So as with all students, some students like group work, most students don't. Some of the things that they complained about was that it was inconvenient for them to meet and work as a group. Obviously, some people complained that their group members weren't pulling their weight. What I did was because we don't have additional hours, it's a 6-credit module, so I actually took one of the classes and said, this is your practical class, and you will, so during this time, you can now then work on your activity. So it surprised me when they came back and said, well, we don't have time to meet, when they should have had time. So this year I've made it compulsory for them to come to the class with the information that they have and that they need to complete the activity and any device that they need, and to do the activity in the class. In terms of the content, So they felt that the content really helped them. So the quizzes were helpful, the learning activities were helpful. Because what I did was, with the learning activities that I created, I formulated them in the same way that I formulate their test and exam questions. So I prefer a more practical approach. I create a scenario and then I ask you to apply certain concepts to that scenario. And that's the same way that I did it with the learning activities that I created. They felt that the activities were a driving force towards knowledge. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm suspecting that it's a good thing. So the activities really encourage them to engage with the material, which is really what I wanted. And then in terms of the concept, so they thought, and I almost feel that this is maybe a consequence of the fact that there aren't many courses that use gamification, or I don't know how popular flipped classrooms are at the university. Yes, there are a handful of people that make use of these, but I think for the majority of students, it's still a chalk and talk experience. So the concept they felt was creative. They felt that there was probably a little bit of a novelty effect when it came to this. So it was something different. It was something interesting for them. So the other thing that I did, or one of the outcomes of using a design-based research approach, is to actually develop design principles. So I thought I'd put some design principles up based on my learnings, or what I drew from what the students said. So firstly, if you are going to use leaderboards, they can promote competition, but you do need to use them carefully. So once again, do you show everybody's marks or everybody's points, or do you only look at the top 5 people within the class? Because what they actually found is that if you show a whole leaderboard, the people at the bottom actually become demotivated and disengage. You need to have clear goals and guidelines. So what are the rules of the game? You need to clearly communicate those. They also should, if there are goals and guidelines, they need to be easily accessible, something that the student can immediately tap into. Feedback should be immediate or provided as soon as possible for all activities that you use. Levels should provide structure and facilitate progression through the game. So it shouldn't just be about moving from one level to the next. You should try and incorporate some level of difference between them. So either your levels need to progress or they need to cover different topics. Also, your content needs to be meaningful. So you can't just put an activity in for the sake of putting an activity in. It should be derived from the content. It should be, and as far as possible, it should be linked to assessment too, or to other assessments too, if possible. Group interaction. So it should facilitate varied social interaction, so both face-to-face and online. So what I took from the students' complaints about group work is that maybe they would have preferred having the option to work face-to-face as a group, and then also having an option to work off campus or remotely with their group. But I do feel that group interaction or social interaction is an important part of a game too, and also an important part of learning. Points, in my case, I needed to make a clear distinction between the allocation of points and marks, and then also rewards. So I wasn't very good with the reward side of things. I would buy a chocolate every now and again. This year I have more tangible rewards. I have rewards and also rewards can be interchangeable. So if you have won an award, then you can exchange your reward for, like I said, access to the quizzes. So you can exchange your points for access to the quizzes. And that's about it. So I'm running a improved version of this intervention that I've discussed with you, and I have highlighted some of the improvements that I've made, but it's still a work in progress. And I would really appreciate any comments that you might have or suggestions for improvement. Thank you.